I will have faith. So, good morning, everybody. We are, where are we today? Friday the 8th, is it? Or the 9th of April? And we're having our morning Srimad-Bhagavatam class. So I'll just sing first. I'll just sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanam Nana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanam Nana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vamachari Yamuna Tira Vamachari Jaya Amarava Kunja Bihari Jaya Amarava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanan Dhanna Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanan Dhanna Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 13, Dhritarashtra quits home, and today's text is text 2. Yavata kritavan prashnam shatakau sarava agrata jata eka bhakti govinde tevyascha uparamaha. Yavata kritavan prashnam shatakau sarava agrata jata eka bhakti govinde Tebyascha uparamaha. Yavata kritavan prashnan shatakau saravagrata jata eka bhakti govinde tebyascha uparamaha. Yavata kritavan prashnan shatakau saravagrata jata eka bhakti govinde tebyascha uparamaha. just go through each of the words, the Sanskrit words in the shloka. Yavata, all that, kritavan, did he put. Prashnan, questions. Shata, a name of Vidura. Kausarava, a name of Maitreya. Agrata, in the presence of. Jata, having grown up. Eka, one. Bhakti, transcendental loving service. Govinda, unto Lord Kṛṣṇa. Tebya, regarding further questions. Cha, and. Upararama, retired from. Ha, in the past. Translation. After asking various questions and becoming established in the transcendental loving service of Lord Kṛṣṇa, Vidura retired from putting questions to Maitreya Muni. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Vidura retired from putting questions before Maitreya Muni when he was convinced by Maitreya Rishi that the sunam bonum of life is to be finally situated in the transcendental loving service of Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa, who is Govinda, or one who satisfies his devotees in all respects. The conditioned soul, the living being in material existence, seeks happiness by employing his senses in the modes of materialism. But that cannot give him satisfaction. He then searches after the supreme truth by the empiric, philosophical, speculative method and intellectual feats. But if he does not find the ultimate goal, he again goes down to material activities and engages himself in various philanthropic and altruistic works, which all fail to give him satisfaction. So neither fruitive activities nor dry philosophical speculation can give one satisfaction, because by nature a living being is the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa, and all the Vedic literatures give him direction towards that ultimate end. The Bhagavad Gita 15:15 confirms this statement. Like Vidura, an inquisitive conditioned soul must approach a bona fide spiritual master like Maitreya, and by intelligent inquiries must try to know everything about karma, fruitive activities, jnana, philosophical research for the supreme truth, and yoga, the linking process of spiritual realization. One who is not seriously inclined to put questions before a spiritual master need not accommodate a show bottle spiritual master, nor should a person who may be a spiritual master for others pose to be so if he is unable to engage his disciple ultimately in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Vidura was successful in approaching such a spiritual master like Maitreya, and he got the ultimate goal of life, bhakti, unto Govinda. Thus, there was nothing to be known further about spiritual progress. I'll just read the translation one more time. After asking various questions and becoming established in the transcendental loving service of Lord Kṛṣṇa, Vidura retired from putting questions to Maitreya Muni. Om ajana timorandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshur umlitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya manobishtam stapitam yena bhutale swayarupa gadamayam dadati swabadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai. It's interesting that questions should have a real and significant purpose and not be asked simply for the sake of it. I can remember that's what this verse and purport are explaining, that you only ask questions that have a real purpose, a real meaning, and when you get the answer, then if that answer is satisfying, it's satisfying, and then you move on to further questions if necessary, or as it states at the very end here in this verse and purport, states at the end that there was no need to continue because all the questions have been satisfied. All the answers to the questions were satisfying, and therefore there was no need to put further questions. And it just, reminds me, I remember in school sometimes with teachers, we'd even have a kind of a plan, we'd strategize, during the break or before the class would begin, basically how to waste time. And we'd ask, seemingly intelligent questions or seemingly questions that needed an answer when either we already knew the answer or could also care less about what the answer would be. And it was just a mechanism for wasting time and messing the teachers about and all that kind of thing. So that's very much been, not supported here in the verse and purport that we're reading today. So yeah, it's interesting that questions need to have a significant purpose. And of course, in the context of Srimad-Bhagavatam, then you're making a clear distinction between questions about spiritual life and questions about who we are and what we should be doing, etc., and how to progress our situation as living entities living in the material world, like that. And then material questions, which, that's not the purpose of this discussion whatsoever between Maitreya and Radura. So questions should have a purpose. And even if they have a purpose, if they've already been answered, they don't need to be asked again. Otherwise, as with Vidura, as what we're reading here today, we should just retire from asking questions. And that actually brings to mind a pastime, just a little short pastime of Srila Prabhupada in the area of questions and all of that kind of thing. So once a journalist asked Srila Prabhupada that the journalist said something like, "I've heard that the pure devotee or a pure devotee knows the answer to all questions." This was actually something that came up a few times actually in Prabhupada's lifetime here with journalists and others. So the journalist said that, "I've heard this, that the pure devotee knows the answers to all questions. Is that correct? Can you confirm that?" And Srila Prabhupada answered and said, "Yes." So, again, from a material point of view, you could argue that Prabhupada's really setting himself up here for a fall because he's just been asked, "Do you know the answer to all questions? Or does a pure devotee know the answer to all questions?" And he said, "Yes." And then the journalist said, "Then how many windows are there in the Empire State Building?" I've been to the Empire State Building. There's quite a lot of windows. And even if you were trying to fake it, you wouldn't get away with trying to count all the windows before giving your answer. There's just too many of them. So how many windows are there in the Empire State Building? And then Srila Prabhupada spontaneously, his response was, he said, "How many drops of water are there in a mirage?" So we know a mirage in the desert doesn't actually exist like that, but people see it and see that there's water and they get somewhere to drink or cool down or whatever. So that was Prabhupada's response. How many water drops are there in a mirage? And in this way, he gave the perfect answer from the pure spiritual platform. And that's the nature of it, that one who's situated in transcendental knowledge, situated in transcendence, they have the perfect answer to any question. And then another related kind of thing that happened with Srila Prabhupada, he had a conversation once, it was in Paris with a professor, and the professor asked, "How many levels of initiation do you have?" And Prabhupada said 2. And the professor said 2, the first, and then Prabhupada jumped in, obviously first and second, but Prabhupada jumped in when he said first, and Prabhupada said, "Yes, first initiation, it's experimental." And the professor just said yes, and then Prabhupada said, "Chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and if you chant that, you become purified. And then second initiation, Gayatri Mantra. But first initiation, according to Jiva Goswami, is sufficient. And chanting Hare Krishna mantra is sufficient. But still, to purify more, the second initiation is given. Gayatri is given. So we're creating Brahmins in Western countries. So it's kind of interesting because, you know, Shastra is so vast and there's so much information in Shastra. So many pastimes and leelas, etc., stories, historical references. It's just such a vast body of knowledge that you can very easily get lost and not be able to see the wood from the trees, you know, because you'll get kind of contradictory stories, you know, and of course the whole principle of Kala, Desha and Patra, time, place and circumstance, you know, and how to apply things in certain situations. You know, on one level, it's a very complex area and a very complex body of knowledge. But here Srila Prabhupada is simply saying, here's a professor, you know, who obviously wasn't a devotee, and he's asking about how many initiations do you have, and, you know, the mind of a person with the title of professor tends to be quite analytical and wanting more information. But Srila Prabhupada is really simplifying it and saying, you know, it's okay, you know, first initiation is sufficient. Chanting Hare Krishna mantra, Prabhupada does quote in the Chaitanya Charitamrita a similar point, where he just makes that even initiation is not necessary at all, that the power of the holy name and the Maha Mantra is sufficient to bring somebody back to Godhead. So going back again to the point here in the verse that, you know, unnecessarily asking questions like that is not necessary. The goal is that, as it's stated in the purport, that the goal is to engage in loving devotional service to Govinda or to Krishna. That's the goal. Once we understand that is the goal, that we accept service to Krishna as the best activity for us, then questions, Prabhupada had this phrase, work now, samadhi later. So once those questions have been answered and you're satisfied that is the goal and that's what we should be doing, then the questions should basically morph then into activity, into action, and specifically the action here would be devotional service to Krishna. As there's nothing more to be known. You've achieved, you know, in one sense, you can always know more, just like in the question from the journalist. Prabhupada could have said, oh, there are, you know, 152,765 and a half windows in the Empire State Building. Prabhupada could have given the specific detail of it. But what's the point of that? There is, you know, it's the same with knowledge from Shastra. If you know the conclusion, you don't need to go back to other stages to find out all different details. You've already been given the Vedanta, if you like, or the Siddhanta, the final conclusion, if you like, of the culmination and the goal of knowledge, service unto Krishna. So then all that's required is that we engage in that activity and we serve Krishna, and we serve the previous acharyas, and we serve Srila Prabhupada. And of course the best way to serve Srila Prabhupada, which is really glorious because he's left something specific behind, if you like, to serve him, is through serving his mission. He has left his mission behind for two purposes. One, to use it as a vehicle for suffering humanity, so that they'll understand the situation that they're in the material world, and have a pathway, a clear pathway to take them out of the material world. And then the other reason is for us, to engage us in the service of Krishna, in pure devotional service like that. Then later in the purport, Prabhupada is clarifying that by doing that, engaging in service to Krishna, Govinda, as we know, the name Govinda is the protector of the cows and the giver of pleasure to the senses. So Govinda will bring satisfaction to his devotees by engaging in his service. We will receive satisfaction that will actually satisfy, as opposed to as satisfaction that we think might satisfy, but doesn't actually achieve that goal. And Prabhupada makes that clear that, you know, people seeking satisfaction through engaging the senses in matter, they'll never be satisfied. Srila Prabhupada used the example in many places that he equates that, trying to do that, with pouring petrol on a fire. And it may look great, when you pour petrol on a fire. That's something else I did as a kid. You pour petrol on a fire and it looks fantastic and the fire blazes, etc. But the fire will never be satisfied. In reality, a fire can burn more petrol than this whole planet can provide. It will just consume it, absorb it, swallow it, if you like. And when it's done that, it'll be very happy to take more like that. There's no, Prabhupada says, if a material desire cannot be satisfied, there is no satiation to material desire. No matter how much you give your senses and engage them in material activity, they will never be satisfied. In fact, Prabhupada states that they will simply, because you are engaging them and you're, in that sense, working them, you're agitating them, they will just become more agitated and that want more and more. And we often see that in the material world. And we know there's 4 basic forms of sense gratification, eating, they're the animalistic propensities I was going to give. We can engage in illicit sex life, we can engage in intoxication, we can engage in gambling, like that, and also eating actually in one sense. But all of these things, they're addictive. And it's not just devotees who will say that, so many non-devotees understand that these things are addictive. And the problem with them is, and you may have somebody, who starts their life drinking beer or whatever in moderation, but a certain percentage of those people will go on to be really hardline drinkers and become alcoholics, etc. And for an external person to look at that person, you can see, well, that's obviously not a satisfying thing. That looks like miserable and, whatever, totally out of it and intoxicated and, anyway, the whole horrible kind of thing that goes along with that. Yet the person is still compelled to do it because the senses are just wanting more and more and more and more, and not knowing how to satisfy them properly and attempting to satisfy them through material means. Doesn't matter. You can keep pouring that fire in. It will still just burn and want more and want more. So the solution, obviously, is to know how to engage the senses that will provide satisfaction like that. So, because in essence, I suppose in a little sutra, material desires are coming. They're coming from an emptiness that we're all feeling. But we're trying to fill that emptiness with something that cannot fill it. Something that's simply not fit for purpose. And therefore we will never be satisfied. So it is, it's amazing that this knowledge has been provided to us by Srila Prabhupada, and as I say so many times when speaking on about Krishna consciousness, that, the only payment for this incredible knowledge we've been given, so that we don't have to go out in the material world and, try to find satisfaction through material means, which will just bring us more misery. It's amazing. The only payment for that incredible knowledge that we've been given by Srila Prabhupada is that we have to share it with others. That's beneficial to us, that's beneficial to them, and of course, it's very, very pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and Lord Kṛṣṇa if we do that. There was that story one time where one devotee, Yamuna Devi, wonderful, glorious, glorious devotee, and she had kind of an issue that, or at least explored, she had a concern, let's say, about sharing recipes, prashadam recipes, etc. And she said it to Prabhupada, well, then everyone will have it. We won't be the people with it, and they'll be all able to do it. And Prabhupada kind of chuckled and said, yes, that's the goal. We want every single person in every house, in every town, city, in every country of the planet to be able to have the knowledge to prepare beautiful Krishna prashadam. That's actually what we're trying to do. But then he went on to say that, and aside from that, if we have something and we don't share it, that develops or increases the envy in our hearts like that. So this sharing, principle of sharing is, in spiritual life, is such an important principle. So then the Prabhupada goes on, he says that this is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, the Sarvasya Chaham Ridi Sanivisto Matasmriti Gyanamapoham Cha verse, that Krishna is saying that he is seated in everybody's heart, and from him comes remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness, and by all the Vedas he's to be known, He's the compiler of the Vedas and the knower of the Vedas. So the simple fact is that if we turn to Krishna in our heart, then all knowledge and memory will be revealed to us, because Krishna remembers everything. But the flip side of that, and of course when I say all knowledge and memory, memory meaning that we will remember who we are and what our situation is, and knowledge, we'll have the knowledge, to how to get out of the situation that we're currently in, effectively lost in the material world. Of course, for devotees, we're not lost in that sense. Because why? Because that path has been given to us. So that's the knowledge, the pathway out, how to get out of the material world, and that's been given to us by Krishna. Of course, it's directly been given to us by Srila Prabhupada, etc. But it's coming from Krishna, and so we engage in Krishna's service. We turn to Krishna in the heart. We pray to Krishna in the heart, and He will give us that knowledge. He will give us that remembrance like that. But on the flip side, if we don't do that, we will remain in a state of forgetfulness. We won't have any memory in terms of remembering and understanding the precarious situation that we've been in many, many times. It's not just one time that we've been in. So we won't have that memory or remembrance. And we also won't have the knowledge of how to get out of it like that. So, and if we don't do that, then we'll be forgetful, and we'll forget our real identity and forget how painful and problematic and troublesome and difficult the situation is that we're currently in. Abrahma Bhuvana Loka, from the highest planet in this material world, this material universe, this material creation, from the very highest planet down to the very, very lowest. All are places of suffering, wherein repeated birth and death take place. So that's the situation that we'll be in. Actually, later on in this particular chapter, Dhritarashtra quits home. That's that famous verse, Ahastani sahastanam apatani chatuspadam pahalgani tatramaha tam jivo jivasya jivanam, is quoted. And it's basically explaining, at that point it's explaining that Vidura is encouraging Dhritarashtra to leave home, which he's successful with, and hence the title of the chapter. And he's encouraging him to leave home because he's coming to, I think Prabhupada uses this phrase, the fag end of your life, So, I mean, I'm 60 this year. So, I've had 6 decades. How many more decades do I have here in this particular body, in this particular situation? Certainly not as many as I had, that's for sure. So, we're coming to the fag end of our life. What to do? Just continue on, basically absorbed or entangled in material life and all the things that material world present to us? Or should we try and do something really positive and prepare ourselves properly for going, hopefully, back to Krishna like that? So it was in that context that Vidura was explaining to Dhritarashtra, you're at the fag end of your life, give up all this politics, give up all this material stuff that you've been engaged in for all of your life. And then he also made reference to the fact, and don't be living off people, off the charity of people, who have usurped their wealth from others, who have done so many wrong things, etc. And now you're living off their charity like a dog, and you're going to die in that state. Why do that? And it was in that context that this verse got, in that conversation that this verse got chanted, the Hastani Sahastanam verse. And the English translation of it is that those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands, and those who are devoid of legs are prey for the four-legged, and the weak are the subsistence of the strong. And this very much it ties in with Darwinian theory and Darwinian philosophy, survival of the fittest. So Bhagavatam is saying that in the material sense, that the weak are the subsistence of the strong, and the general rule holds that one living being is simply food for another. And in the purport of that verse, Prabhupada is talking about the systematic law of subsistence and the struggle for existence. And it's designed ultimately by Krishna. And of course, just to state, because many people struggle with that, thinking, well, why is God so cruel that he creates this material world? He's creating it simply because we want it. And Krishna will fulfill all desires. He will fulfill all desires. So if we want the material world, a place where we can come, forget about Krishna and forget about our service to Krishna and engage our senses in sense gratification, then Krishna will provide that facility. So this material world is created by the Supreme Will, and there's no escape for us other than surrender to Krishna, as we've just been discussing. Other than that, there's no escape by no matter how much planning. So you have all those stories about different particularly wealthy personalities in history, trying to make all these plans, going right back to Hiranyakashipu, who made a deal with Lord Brahma, can't be killed in day and night, inside, outside, with weapons, etc., by humans, and all these different conditions that he negotiated with Lord Brahma. But still he was killed, because no amount of planning will save you. So Krishna came at dusk, it wasn't day or night, he was half human, half animal, so he was neither one or the other. He didn't have any weapon as such, he used his nails and all these different things. So we can plan like we like, but we're not the most intelligent. Krishna's far more intelligent than us, so ways around will always. So there's no solution to this problem once we're in the material world, the struggle for existence. And living beings that come into this world against the will of Lord Krishna, it's not that he wants them, they're governed and controlled by Maya Shakti, who's an agent of Krishna. And Maya is meant to pinch the conditioned soul, I think is the phrase Prabhupada uses, by the threefold misery, Adi-atmika, Adi-bhautik, Adi-devik. They're suffering from other living entities. You might get bitten by a dog, or worse, a tiger. You might, we get affected by, there's so much talk these days about global warming and so many storms and problems like that. So that's problems coming from pinching us from material nature. And then, of course, the biggest of all really is the troubles that come from our own mind and the suffering. We talk, actually they're talking so much now during this whole pandemic thing that's been going on for more than a year now, about people's mental health and how people are suffering on the mental platform so much like that. So these are the threefold miseries, and they're Maya's tools, if you like, to pinch us and try to get us to come to our senses like that. And one of those miseries in this verse is really highlighted, and that's that the weak are the subsistence of the strong. And no one is able to protect themselves from the onslaught of somebody stronger. Somebody much more strong, powerful, fit, agile, etc. comes to us. And that's why in society, sorry, I'm going to stray a little bit, but that's why it's interesting in society. Prabhupada talks about Varna Sankara, unwanted children, where children aren't necessarily planned and people are just, like that. But you see that in countries in the world, one of the biggest problems to civil order in society is kind of younger people, particularly males, rioting and all that kind of stuff, and causing trouble. Because these people are really young and fit, and I as a 60-year-old may want to go out and stop them, but I won't be able to because they're much stronger than me. So no one is able to protect themselves from the onslaught of somebody stronger. And the arrangement of the Lord is there are weaker people, stronger people, etc. It's just the way it is. And it's also interesting that, nobody will particularly lament, although having said that, it can be if you see them on nature programs, you can feel some sort of empathy, but we don't particularly lament. And actually, all of those naturalists, by the way, the likes of the David Attenboroughs of this world, they'll all say that they when they're in the field, so to speak, they'll never interfere. If a lion is killing a deer or something, they'll never interfere because that's nature's law. And if man interferes, it just causes more problems, which is the history of the world. Whatever man involved himself with, more problems come. So in that sense, won't particularly lament. The strong killing the weak like that. What was I going to say there? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So that goes on. Jivo jivasya jivanam, that one living entity is food for another, and that's happening all the time. And of course we have predators as well in that sense, because tigers, lions, etc. are stronger than us, they can come. But what's our position? And then Prabhupada speaks in the purport about our position is to get out of that cycle. And that's where we might, have a difference with the naturalists, etc., and the people, who are so much into that whole area. because they think it's glorious and they're not necessarily wanting to get out of it. But devotees see this is not a nice situation, you know. Yes, it's natural, it's God's law, it's nature's law, but it doesn't mean that it's nice. It's, again, the idea is that just like Maya via the threefold miseries is trying to pinch us to come to our senses, we should see that looking in the material world and how callous and cruel it can be. Because going back now to, I'll be a little sentimental, but if you do see a little baby deer or something like that, and next thing it just gets grabbed, you know, by a lion, it just looks horrible. This is the material world. This is going on all the time, you know. That I'm not sure what the statistics are, but how many living entities are leaving their bodies every single day that we're living, every single minute. How many are leaving? And of course, the leaving of the material body is tragic in any circumstance, unless, of course, you're in spiritual consciousness, you're conscious of Krishna, and then it's glorious. You know, probably gives that nice example, just like we're talking about lions. So the lion will then, she or he, whatever the lion or it is, may come home. They just, killed, some creatures in the wild in the most horrendous, horrible way, and of course they do it with their claws and their teeth. But then they'll pick up their little baby, and even put the baby in their mouth and carry them along or whatever like that, and the baby's completely happy and feeling completely protected from the same animal that just devoured some other creature like that. So that's our situation. If we're dying, leaving the body in Krishna consciousness, where Krishna is lifting us up like that, like the lion is lifting up their cub. So it's a kind of glorious thing. But other than that, if we're not in that consciousness, it's just all miserable. It's just kind of all horrible. So Prabhupada talks about in the purport. So for us, the first thing that we have to do is don't participate in that cycle of the weak being the subsistence for the strong, and rather as devotees, the first thing is we don't kill anything for sustenance. A devotee will never eat anything that contains blood like that. It's just a complete no-no. And Krishna tells us in Bhagavad Gita also, patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati, that if you offer me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit or water, I would accept it. So the vegetarian diet is being very much promoted by Krishna, and that's what we should do. And then that elevates us, gets us out of that whole cycle of ahastani, sahastanam. We just immediately get out of that cycle, and we're on a completely different track. And that track is that track or pathway is Krishna's pathway, Prabhupada's pathway, and we're protected like that. So again, then I should look at the time here. Where are we? Okay, I'll speak for a few more minutes. Then again, in the purport, Prabhupada goes on to warn us about or against approaching a spiritual master just for show of fashion, to have a guru, an uptown guru. I think Prabhupada used that phrase one time. That we shouldn't be doing that. This is all a waste of time. We just have a waste of time. And just on that point, actually, it is important to know, I think, that, if we're wasting our time through ignorance, that's one thing. But if we actually have knowledge and then we continue to waste our time, that's more serious, because we have the knowledge, we know what we should be doing, and then we actively choose not to do it. So that's also something that we should meditate on. So Prabhupada is saying that we don't approach a spiritual master just out of fashion and just to have one like that. But then he goes on to, in terms of the spiritual masters, he goes on then to say that spiritual masters shouldn't pose just as spiritual masters, and unless they can actually engage people in the service of Krishna and put them on that progressive pathway back to Krishna's lotus feet, then they're bogus. And if they can't do that and they act in that bogus way, that's doomed to failure. For all concerned, it's doomed to failure. And actually, again, because they're doing that out of knowledge, and completely misusing that sacred relationship between guru and disciple, it's not just doomed to failure, but we wouldn't even want to consider the reactions that will come as, or negative reactions that will come as a result of us doing that. So really we shouldn't do it. And Prabhupada quotes in one purport, I think in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says that it's better to be a humble street sweeper than a charlatan meditator. So all of these kind of glorious examples and instructions that come from every single purport that Prabhupada wrote, and he wrote so many of them, and this is just one that we're reading today, but just incredible. They're just infused and overflowing, a little bit like flowers that have just come into bloom. There's just so much in them, and so much information, so much knowledge, etc. It's quite incredible. So yeah, the essence of this verse then is for us to be as sincere as possible, as we possibly can be, and engage our body, our mind, our soul in Krishna's service, and do it in all humility, because without doing it, it's not sustainable unless it's done in a humble way. If it's not done in a humble way, it ultimately will all come crashing down on us. And humility really, understanding our position and how dependent we are on Krishna and Krishna's devotees, and not to be distracted by external pressures that will come from simply doing that, engaging in Krishna's service. Those pressures will come, from family, friends, society, media, academia, and, so many other sources. And any or all of those sources, will suggest from time to time, if not constantly, that what we're doing, we're blind followers, anyway, it's just such an amazing thing, that, it's just such an amazing thing. I was reading an article recently about, they found some, I think they call it the fifth force, and this goes back, by the way, to the creation of the universe, etc. And they found some fifth force or fifth energy, because what they had understood up to this point, which is always an amazing thing, whatever they present to you is presented as, essentially factual, but then every now and again they come up with new information that, and I think the phrase I read was, this will mean pushing the reset button for all the scientists, physicists, etc. on the planet, So, I see. So everything you told us before, now it's all being reset because of this new theory that you have. So anyway, basically, whatever the four existing powers and forces are, they can't explain some of the phenomena that they now understand. Therefore, there must be a fifth force. And I was hoping I'd read that they say the fifth force is, some metaphysical supreme person, but of course it's not. They think they have some, scientific or equation or conclusion to it, but they haven't discovered it yet. They're still working on it. So yeah, in humility that we accept these things, and these pressures that come from outside, and they look at us and condemn us as being blind followers, or somehow, you don't believe in all that stuff, that kind of thing. But it's quite an amazing thing, you can just flip the whole thing around, and then you get the reality that no, what we're on is the path to perfection. And the knowledge and information is just so incredible and so logical and makes so much sense, but is also supported by great souls who are in control of their senses. Yet we're presented, or they want to present us as being the naive ones, etc., etc. Whereas with them, the information has been presented by people who are not in control of their senses, and are subject to the four defects of making mistakes, lying, cheating, all these different things. And their information that they readily tell us is not complete because they're always searching for more, etc. And now they've got a new concept. Yet they're the ones that present themselves as being the best ones to follow. It's quite an amazing thing how the material world works, and how people get kind of boxed in certain ways, and it's just an interesting dynamic. And in that regard, actually, the thing about, the pressures that may come, Srila Prabhupada tells a story. I don't know if you've heard this story, but I think it says the devotee, or the name of the story was the devotee who kept their tilak. And it probably explains that there was once a factory where all the workers, they were Hindus, and many of them were Vaishnavas working in that factory. And therefore, they had full freedom to be Vaishnavas, because it was run by Hindus, and many, even if they weren't Vaishnavas, but a lot of them were, but so they were free to be devotees, basically. And they would wear their tilak to work, etc. and display other Vaishnava paraphernalia, neck beads, and different things. So many different things. But then after some time, the factory was sold, and the new owner was a Muslim. So when he took over the business, this Muslim, and he declared actually that he wouldn't allow people come to work anymore wearing tilak and neck beads and all of that kind of stuff. So virtually all the workers, they obeyed that because they wanted to keep their job, I guess, whatever. And they all then came to the factory, no tilak, no neck beads, no external signs of being devotees whatsoever. However, one fellow, he came and he just thought, I'll take my chances basically and depend on Krishna. So he came and he still had his neck beads and his tilak on. And when the owner came to do some, just a walk around, whatever, he saw that all the workers, they had obeyed his order. But then he saw this one person who hadn't, and he was still wearing tilak, etc. So he stopped, he saw him, and most of the factory workers, certainly the ones in the vicinity, near vicinity, could see this, and they were fearing for their work colleague. He's disobeyed him. What's going to happen like that? So the boss stopped, looked at this person, and then he said, "Wow, you are such a courageous person. Even though I said this shouldn't happen anymore, you, based on your faith and based on your conviction, you've come and you've still been true to that faith and true to your convictions. Therefore, you can continue for the rest of your days working for me. You can continue to wear your Vaishnava tilak and your other paraphernalia. But for everyone else who today came in without that, who followed my instruction, you cannot. You have to remain as is like that." And the moral of the story is that we shouldn't unnecessarily, abandon or ditch our Vaishnava culture. I remember one time going to a school to do a program, and sometimes you go, there's different situations and different teachers, and the dynamic can be different in the classroom, particularly when they merge a few classes together. So you might have sometimes up to maybe 200 students, and then they get a bit boisterous and get a bit this and a bit that. So I said to the teacher, "Do you want me to, start, or if you want to make an introduction, etc., etc.?" And he said, "Oh, you're probably better off just to start, So I decided I wouldn't say anything, and I just sat down cross-legged on the floor. There were a few of us there, actually, a few devotees, but I just sat down cross-legged on the floor and started playing harmonium and started chanting Hare Krishna. And as soon as that happened, the whole room fell silent. And the teacher said to me afterwards, he says, "That was just amazing." He said, because they were now seeing something that then they hadn't seen before, weren't familiar with. And some person, first off, is sitting down on the floor cross-legged, so that's kind of something that they wouldn't be so familiar with like that. But then playing a beautiful instrument and having a melodious kind of session, chanting, singing session like that. And I just remember thinking that so many times in my life, in even so seemingly difficult situations, that when you present yourself as you are and who you are, the vast majority of times it's really well received. It is really well received. Yeah, so we should have courage like this factory worker, and we should be resolute in our determination. We should be resolute in our determination on the path of Krishna consciousness, knowing we can take full faith, full shelter. We know that, we know that. For so many listening today, I'm sure, will have been practicing Krishna consciousness for many, many years, many decades even, like that. Why? Why are we doing that? Yes, sometimes it's difficult, we're still in the material world, we still have material senses, etc. But we know that there's just nothing that comes close in terms of a path for life, or what we should do with our lives. There's nothing that comes close to being as good as, what to speak of, better than the path of Krishna consciousness. So let's use that to our advantage. We don't need to ask questions anymore. Let's just get out there and have people ask questions of us, so as that we can bring them to the stage that we're at in terms of conviction, and beyond us. That's another thing, the spiritual master will do. He only wants to see, it's the total opposite of the material world. But a spiritual master, he wants to see his disciples excel and do well, and even, do better than the spiritual master themselves. So that's really, we should grab that, use our conviction, our faith in Krishna consciousness to help others and to bring others to, as I say, the stage that we're at, or even beyond. But I think I'll stop there. We have, we're going now. I don't know how many people joined in, and I don't know how many people stayed with it, but it was very nice speaking to you. And, all glories to your service, and keep doing everything you can, both for your own development in Krishna consciousness and also to help others. And, of course, they're not mutually exclusive. The more that we help others in their Krishna consciousness, the more we benefit ourselves. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.